All right. Hello, everyone. This is Helen Dombalis, Executive Director of National Farm Network. Thank you for joining our live coffee chat and for bearing with us as we're starting a few minutes late, given my need to learn technology. So today's coffee chat, this is our April coffee chat. These are the third Tuesdays of every month, is a youth garden conversation. We're going to talk about growing racial equity and food justice with school gardens. We have Betty Wiggins and Dorothy Grady Scarborough to share their experiences, ideas, and visions for growing racial equity and food justice through school gardens. I'll share their bios in a moment, but they are two of my longtime farm to school friends and amazing women. So you all are in for a real treat. So I want to start by thanking my colleague, Crystal Orietta is the brilliance and the leadership behind these coffee chats. She was not able to join today, but wanted to just thank her for her leadership in coming up with the idea of these coffee chats and the concept as a way to work towards our call to action for a racially just food. So welcome to everyone who's here. You can share your video. We encourage you to do so. Click the share button in the lower right-hand corner to share it in your profile feed. And for those of you who may not be familiar with National Farm to School Network, we are an information advocacy and networking hub for community bringing local food. So we're seeing school gardens and food and agriculture education into schools and early care and education settings. So our mission: increase access to local food and gardens and nutrition education to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. And our call to action that we released last fall, which was the catalyst for forming these coffee chats, is that by 2025, of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. So we are going to be spending time today specifically talking about school gardens as a strategy to pursue racial equity. And I'm getting a message from our communications director, okay, about instructions I gave you on sharing video. Apparently irrelevant, so ignore that. Just glad y'all are here. So this coffee chat series, as I just mentioned, follows up on that movement meeting we had last fall around shifting power and racial equity. I want to say a special thanks to the National Cooperative Grocers for their support of National Farm to School Network. Their support helps make this coffee chat series possible. And today, for National Garden Month, our conversation is going to focus specifically on growing racial equity and food justice with school gardens. So with that, I am pleased to introduce Betty Wiggins and Dorothy Grady Scarborough. So as I shared, Betty is a longtime friend of National Farm to School Network and Farm to School and myself. She currently serves as Officer of Nutrition for Houston Independent School District, the nation's 7th largest school district. She manages and implements all of the district school nutrition programs, serving more than 280,000 nutritious meals to students.
Okay, Helen, that's enough. Let's get into the conversation. That's enough. That's enough. Everybody knows who I am. Let's go. Let's go.
All right, Betty. Yeah, the first day I met Betty, let's just say I followed her around.
Yeah, let's go.
Dorothy works as a health wellness specialist with Mega Mississippi Engage in Greener Agriculture. She's been a long time co-director of the Mississippi Farm to School Network, state lead core and supporting partner in Mississippi. So yeah, I'll be quick about the bio so that we can get into the exciting content. I think the last thing I'll just share is that I actually just came back yesterday from 3 months of parental leave. I welcomed a new little girl into the world 12 weeks ago, a 3.5-year-old. And for the first time leave, I started with my daughters, and we went out this morning and looked to see if the seeds had started sprouting, and they had. And the joy that she and I felt just like literally dancing around is something that every kid deserves to feel, to experience. And it's not just about feeling that joy of growing food, but it's also about being able to eat nutritious food and having access regardless of skin color, where you live, ability. So this is a subject, as executive director of National Farm to School Network, that's near and dear to me, but has become even more relevant just in the last few months as I added another baby girl to my family. So with that, I'm going to just launch right into questions. So Betty, if you want to take this first one first,
Sure.
go back and forth. You all can also be sending questions in via Facebook Live, and Anna Mullen, our amazing communications director, will be watching those. So, Betty, why don't you start by telling me a little bit about the work that you do in Houston?
The work that I do in Houston is not too much different than the work I did in Detroit, where I, you know, Rebel Lunch Lady, 82 School Gardens, the community-based farm, on and on and on. Here in Houston now, I have a 6.5-acre farm. I'm wearing the shirt. I don't know how to do this, but we have something called the Food and Agricultural Literacy Program. I took the concept that I believed in and have always strongly believed in, that children should have more than a consumer relationship with their food, that we should be teaching children how to grow food. We should be teaching kids how to make choices. And that not necessarily since they did away with home economics and all the other things that we used to enjoy when I was a kid growing up, that they now can do it in the garden. I mean, you know, I love little children, but I get really jazzed when I see 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and high schoolers out there in the garden learning about food. And also I see school garden as a community asset. The history has been, when I talk to Dorothy all the time, they'll say, "Oh, you're from Michigan." I say, "No, I'm from northern Mississippi." Because Michigan is nothing but a bunch of folk who were agriculturalists in Mississippi who came north for the automobile industry, and they started planting gardens in the back of their yards, back of their garages. So it was all about growing food, it was all about planting food, but we got away from that as we started being more commercialized, and we started letting kids watch advertisement, we started letting, you know, Cocoa Puffs and everybody else decide what our kids are going to eat, instead of teaching our kids about growing vegetables, about growing fruits, about canning, about preserving food. And I thought that this is what we needed to do here. So here in Houston, on my 6.5-acre farm, which is located on the third oldest school district footprint in Harris County, which is the county Houston's located in, we're going to have a community-based garden. And we're having a program that's associated with a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school, and just still all the other things that we have. I got an ag educator from Iowa State, so you all should be proud of it, and Prairie View should be proud of him. I have a culinarian from Howard University as well as Johnson University, and then I have a director who for 20, almost I think 12 or 15 years, I forget the one, was the marketing director for the Dairy Council. Can you believe it? That incredible pool of talent I have now that's helping me put this whole new way of teaching kids to have more than a consumer relationship with food.
Fantastic. Thanks, Betty. Dorothy, I shared very briefly your bio, so please tell folks a little bit about your organization's work.
Good evening. I still wear two hats, of course. I'm the founder and director for Mississippi Farm to School Network. And Sonny and I that particular organization, and MEGA, Mississippians Engaged in Greener Agriculture. It's the two projects that I work with. Since back in '96, we have been doing school gardens. They were not called farm to school. We just called them school gardens back in the day. So we work with children, and it was always said that our kids need to know, where their food comes from. But that's not all they need to know. They need to know how to grow this food. They need to know how to be able to sustain themselves. For an example, earlier in the pandemic issue, when we had limited amount of produce in the stores and the price started flying in every direction, at that point, we felt that the children has a great opportunity now to actually launch the program that we were working on, and that's having mentors working with our children to get them up to speed on being able to grow their food. That's one of the things that we do with MEGA. And since the pandemic, of course, it pushed us in a new direction with Farm to School. We went from having school gardens to having home gardens for our school-aged children. And with that work, it is also statewide, Mississippi. And we are working with families to, since they were home, we had to take the gardens where our children were.
Wow.
So we're doing home gardening for our school-age children. That program is going over really well. We always say we took a bigger bite than we could chew, because we had funding initially for just roughly 150 gardens, but we got applications for 1,130 families, which was still,
Yeah.
because we have money there, I'm like, wow, this is a great interest here. So we were able to leverage funding from some other organizations to assist us with it. But it's still a lot of work to get those funds out to those families, to get those gardens. But we have been blessed we're moving, but it's the process of getting it there. So that's pretty much what we've been working on.
Tremendous. And I appreciate both of you have already addressed the importance of community engagement, whether it's at home or Betty, you were talking about the community-based approach with the farm at the school district. So thank y'all for sharing that. That's obviously a core value of farm to school. So y'all touched on school gardens, more, and school farms more generally. I want to get into the specifics of racial equity justice given the National Farm to School Network's charge. So when you hear growing racial equity and food justice with school gardens, what does that look like to you? Dorothy, that one first.
What I see there is that regardless of our skin color or our nationality, I feel that all children should have access to healthy and fresh food. They should know how to grow it, and it should be accessible in all homes.
Yeah.
And one way that we're doing that is by working with our families to teach them, how to grow their own food.
Betty?
Well, it's kind of different for me, Helen. I came here to Texas, and, being from Michigan, being from Detroit, you talk about racial equity. I had a small population of Hispanic individuals or kids in my school district, probably around 18%. Now I'm in a school district where 62% Hispanic and 20% African American, and God, 8% or whatever else you call us. But people of color, they're dominant. They're predominant here in Houston. And how do you talk about not only racial equity, but less cultural sensitivity? I've always believed in diversity. And I always thought that one of the reasons that I believed in school gardens, even with little kids, and it was growing heirlooms, to teach kids about diversity, to tell them that all carrots don't have to be orange. All beets, when you cut them open, are not necessarily red through and through. All cucumbers and even squash are different. And then let's even talk about when you pull something about the ground and it has two legs instead of the one that you normally, that's about handicapping. And so many things that could be taught, and lessons that can be taught in a garden about equity and fairness and inclusion and just so many other things that kids don't necessarily see it in the classroom, but they can live it out in real time in a garden. And then the whole thing about when I was in Detroit, I had the privilege of having a Middle Eastern garden that I'm trying to find some people down here now that we can grow foods from various different cultures, because what a great way to teach us about who we are as a people. Not, you black, I'm white. No, who are we as a people? When you learn to eat my food, that gives you an understanding of who I am. It gives you an understanding about my culture. When you can sit down at a table and break bread with me, and I find out that black eyed peas are not only African American, but they're also Middle Eastern, they're also, or curry, or some of the stuff, the things that we can teach around food, the civilizing of us as a people around food. So that's one of the reasons I talk about more than a consumer relationship with food. It teaches us, it teaches our kids, it teaches us to have a greater understanding for who we are as a people. Because push come to shove, I keep telling people all the time, when I grew up, I told people I grew up in a farm, and they would say, well, what part of the South are you from? And I said, Southern Michigan. But they could not understand how there were black people growing, there's a whole bunch of folks all over the country And so it gave us an opportunity, farming, that farming experience of growing food and the celebrations around harvesting and stuff. And even now, I'm quite sure you have it, Dorothy, you have it where one harvest and we go out and we cook some food and boil some corn or work in a garden. And the whole thing is so civilizing. It's such a natural thing to do.
Thank you both. That was beautiful. I think just how you all articulated the importance of equitable access and engagement in the actual growing of food and the consuming of food, through school gardens and farms. But then Betty, you adding on that layer of what growing vegetables and foods in a school garden or farm teaches us about how it's just like people. And at the end of the day, we're all people, and yeah, we all have the same desire for celebrating community, and we all deserve access to nutritious food. So thank you all for that. And y'all touched on this, but I think more broadly, just taking it to the bigger picture, why do you all think it's important to focus on food justice? And either of you can take that first.
I almost said no justice, no peace. Because what do you got to think about it? Food justice or food, food injustice is why we got all these little fat little children running around here. When kids are not having access to fresh fruits and vegetables, when all of a sudden we've taken away a primal responsibility of taking care of our young, raising food and teaching our to cook and preserve and some of the things that we've done naturally. When we turn it over to somebody else, I mean, that's the reason I have a problem with buying prepared foods with SNAP benefits. I'd rather let somebody use some SNAP benefits to buy some seeds to plant some food than some prepared food. So that to me is the first rung on our responsibility to our children, is to feed them well and ensure that everybody has equal access. Food deserts. Why are there food deserts? Why do our children have to be exposed to that kind? It's about commercialization. You can go behind a garage and plant some tomatoes. You can go along the side of a driveway and plant some strawberries instead of growing grass. I mean, you can do school gardening or gardening period anywhere. You can do it on containers and balconies. If we would take growing up food as being essential, as a central response of taking care of our children.
With that
Thanks, Betty.
too, Betty, when you was talking, I was sitting here thinking about people would say to buy fresh fruits and vegetables are so expensive. I do agree, but when we got any kind of space, even if it's all concrete slabs, we can still grow food. And I don't mean on the naked concrete, but that's when we can use those containers. We can use those containers to be able to grow that food that we need, putting it in pots, putting it in buckets, putting it in whatever that will hold some soil. And I feel strongly that that will be the most economical way for our families to be able to get what we need. Most of the time when our children grow that food, if we get a relationship with it while it's growing, I remember Helen said initially when we were opening that they look forward to that seed sprouting. And I've been doing this so many years now, but I'm still excited when I see that first pop of that seed coming out. And when our children see that, and if we have conversations around that seed, what that seed is going to produce in the end, our children are impatiently waiting to get that in order to eat it. And if they try taste testing at school, we push and encourage our babies to take that same concept home and push and insist that mom and dad buy this in the store, or let's grow this plant in a pot on the side of the yard. And, you find a lot of yards where families just love those beautiful flowers. Yes, they are beautiful, but you can't eat those flowers. Put some peppers, put some squash, put some eggplants. It has color. add that in there with the keep the flowers. We need them, but add some more stuff in there with it.
Pollinators, yeah.
You know, a lot of people do not want to work in a garden, but they love their flower beds. So let's just intertwine the two together and just see how beautiful and how productive that particular garden plot or that flower bed will become.
You know,
Yeah,
Dorothy,
all those seeds bloom and make flowers, but it makes food in the end.
but Dorothy, I have to tell you this. How did I get into school gardens? This is really how I got into school gardens. I lived in Detroit. I have no grandchildren, you know, my son, just blame it on the boys. But I have I have no grandchildren. So one day I was out in my yard growing, you know, and I just decided I wanted to grow watermelons. I wanted to test this out. And the little boy next door who lived 3 doors down from me, his granny lived 3 doors, he came over to my yard and he said, Miss Betty, what are you doing? I said, I'm planting watermelons. He said, Miss Betty, you doing, it's wrong. You wrong, Miss Betty. I said, why? He said, watermelons come from Kroger's. That's when I knew, wait a minute, I'm missing something here. I'm in food. I'm responsible for all these hungry children. I just pat myself on the back and make myself feel all warm, fuzzy. And I get kids walking around thinking watermelons come from Kroger's. So that's when I proceeded to dig up my backyard and I planted watermelons for Devon. Ethan, I planted strawberries along where I used to have my gladiolas and my and my hostas, all those other things. I planted strawberries and hula berries. I started planting vegetables for kids. And then I started saying, well, wait a minute, here I am in Detroit. And that was the year before I met you, Helen. This was in 2009. I started farming. Did I meet you? 2010, when Farm to School came to Detroit. That's when I got involved in Farm to School. And it was out of a community of recognition for me in my community that my kids were walking around basically ignorant about where vegetables came from. They thought they came from Kroger's and Eastern Market. They didn't know that they could grow them right in their own backyard. And so from then on, every year I had this whole yard full of everybody else's grandchildren. Their grandparents got mad at me, of course, who would come down to help Miss Betty plant her garden in her backyard. So, I mean, that's how it started. That started for me. And it started for me is to I got responsibilities for these kids. Well, I can't say that I'm in food and I care about kids. And they don't have any more in a consumer relationship with, and that's when the light went off. They don't have any more in a consumer relationship with their food.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, it reminds me of the story that you hear of the kids who say, you know, milk comes from white, chocolate milk comes from brown cows.
I heard Weber tells me that he never saw a cow give chocolate milk.
Yeah. My daughter might like that. Yeah, and I think what you all, you know, really are getting at is the importance of experiential education. And I mean, Betty, you said it with the name of y'all's farm, agriculture literacy, that Farm to School is not just about, you know, supporting local farmers, but it's about actually raising our future generation to ask those questions about where the food comes from, how was it grown, to support a more just, you know, racially, environmentally, you know, Dorothy, you brought up, you know, from a health perspective, a better future for us. So, you know, I think this question of why food justice, like, I feel like, you know, Betty, we all, you know, you kind of just not essentially like, why not? Because all humans deserve access to nutritious food. And certainly, you know, for those of you that are here attending live or that watch this later, you know, if you haven't studied the distinction between equality, equity, and justice, I would encourage you to do so. I think a lot of times we talk about equality where everybody has the same thing, but ultimately we're not going to achieve that, and we're not going to have a just world and a just food system if we don't pursue equity as the way to get there. So that means that, you know, different resources are infused and different things happen in different places based on you know, access. So what do you all think, if we're going to work towards a more racially just food system, what do y'all think needs to shift, either in terms of resources or programming within school gardens, to actually achieve a more racially just food system. We haven't really dug into that,
You
to that
taught
specifically.
you taught me something, Helen. Let me tell you what Farm to School taught me in 2010. Equity. I had never heard that word before. I got all up, equality, yada, 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 equality, yada, yada. And they taught me about equity. I had never, and I went to the conferences and I finally started appreciating what Farm to School was talking about when they started talking about equity. I started those school gardens out of a personal thing of access. Started access for me. It started about access. And my kids in Detroit didn't have major supermarket chains or Eastern Market like we have in Detroit. It's a tourist attraction. It has nothing to do with feeding the community. It has a place where people can come who have means that can feel good on a Saturday afternoon, pulling their wagons through and buying all the fresh vegetables they ever could think they want. And then to think that my kids in the neighborhood get their fresh vegetables out of a gas station as an impulse item at the end, so they can spend that last 25 cents on a food stamp, on a SNAP benefit. But you taught me about equity. And the more I started clearly understanding about equity and then diversity and then a whole bunch of other stuff, that became important to me. And I think what we need to do is, don't worry about the farmers. Excuse me, I should say that's heresy. I know I shouldn't say that, but I was all pretty good in Detroit. 43% of my produce came from local farmers. I was pretty good in Detroit. Do you imagine? I can't even approximate that in Texas. Do you know I would clean out every field there is in the valley if I tried to say local produce was the main reason that I was engaging in Farm to School here in HISC. The main reason I'm engaging in Farm to School here is because I want my kids to have more than consumer relationship with their food. I want the people who are on the outskirts and peripheral of Houston to be able to go to a community garden and have a pick and pay farm. How about that? 6.5 acres. Can you imagine? I have the audacity to say that we're going to have a 6.5 acre pick and pay farm where the community can have access. Or we're talking about giving community people small plots of land where they can have like a twist on a CSA, because it's, and then I had to learn a lot about growing food down here. There's so many other ways that we can expand that about equity. It's availability. How are we going to use our resources, and who is out there representing that population? Who's out there representing it? There's this photo about, everybody standing on these boxes and how you get, who's out there representing the person that got the short box? Who's out there representing and making sure that we're making those things available? Why can't we talk about community gardens as something that our federal government can be invested in? We hear about all these other ways. I like to see, I think in Detroit, we had food stamps, senior gardens that they could come to our garden and use them. We got, so many things, so many clever, good ideas, creative, have been developed to expand equity, but we got to build upon those. We got like food stamps, SNAP benefits at farmers markets, or SNAP benefits at community access gardens. How about that? Or even at a kid's garden. How about that?
Dorothy, any thoughts from you, especially specific to school gardens and equity, yes, but racial equity specifically? National Farm to School Network, as we were developing our current strategic plan, that call to action that I talked about earlier, decided to hone in specifically on racial equity, recognizing that all other, equities that we're needing to achieve as a society have to start with racial equity. If we don't start with that, we're not going to succeed in the others. So I'm curious, Dorothy, for you and your work, especially where you see room for improvement when it comes programming and resources for school gardens as we work towards racial justice.
It's one of those areas that when you're working with our children, we have already been exposed to conversations that has handicapped our children or our families. Before I answer what you asked me, when we have talked with families in the past about participating in garden programs, community gardens, church gardens, even their own backyard gardens, they reflect back on our ancestors. And they talk about what our parent went through and what our grandmother did. And these babies was not around when there was sharecropping. I caught the tip of the iceberg. So if you were under the age of 60, you didn't get to taste sharecropping.
Right.
And you can't say I can't do this because of what happened to me. So it's a little bit of education got to come in there in order for us to accept the garden program into our communities. It's available to us, but we got that stigma that's still there, that's interfering with us from being able to receive what's available to us. And, you know, I went through the hard work, yes, but the hard work did not destroy me. I look at the hard work as being the building block or my stepping stones to be who I am today. So if I didn't experience the sharecropping or the unjust in the job market, then I wouldn't be who I am today. I took what I learned back then and now I apply it as I work in the school gardens or push community gardens or church gardens. As I mature, I don't get to do as much of the physical work as I used to, but I promote and now I educate others to do it. And the information is there. Sometimes we have to seek it or we have to be taught about it. But I think it might not be as accessible as we want it to be because a lot of times our ears are close to that conversation or that's not for me. So we got to work there to get the communities to understand that these things are here for us and pull away from, I don't know how the word flows, but I'm gonna say it, pull away from what we think should be given to us, but we should go after what's available to us. If we would go after what's available to us, then I think it would be, the equity would be there more or less for everyone. And because it's, like I say, it's there, but when you're talking about it, if our families doesn't have their mindset to receive this, then they're not gonna accept it. So that's what limited in our community is because we don't have that open mind to receive it.
But you know, Dorothy, I have to say something, guys, because it's not only just about racial equity, it's also about social equity. I represent a whole bunch of little kids who happen not to be brown or black, but who are disadvantaged because I watch their parents go into these large box stores and boy, they be throwing these industrial sized things up on the line. They got all the money in the world, but you're not seeing a bunch of fresh fruits and vegetables going up on that line. You're seeing industrial, I call them industrial size of chips and snacks or whatever. We need to share that with all of our children. That the whole thing about school, about gardening, it's not a rich man's sport. You know, gardening is not a rich man's sport. Every man can participate in gardening, like I said, with seeds and the likes. If we want to talk about what, you know, programmatically we can do. Some of these government programs, like, let me use my SNAP benefits to buy some transplants. Let me buy some seeds. Let me, you know, be able to have some sort of church gardens. When you said that, Dorothy, that's how my folk from North Carolina got to Michigan. We were on a church farm. The farm came up, well, even our state was Tennessee, matter of fact, but we were from North Carolina. I was raised on a church farm the first 5 years of my life. And that's how we started, but it was a whole thing to be raised around Eastern Europeans who taught us how to raise Michigan crop. Because we didn't know how to raise them but speckled butter beans and stuff like that, but they taught us how. So it's a whole thing of equity. It's about a shared experience. And if we, and don't forget my little kids at the end of the cul-de-sac. Bertrand Weber, who's a friend of mine, used to say she's always talking about those kids at the end of the cul-de-sac. Because sometimes people forget and they need just as much care. Money don't buy everything. A little time and effort to help will go a long way. And so we could have that shared experience of taking them out. That's what school gardens, I think, Helen, play a lot. That I had that opportunity to share that with no matter what ethnic group the kids belong to. And then here in Houston, I didn't realize the impact of stoop labor and what the impact of stoop labor had on my Hispanic children, while the older kids did not want to get into garden programs. I understood the whole thing around African-American kids and sharecropping and stuff, although they, like Dorothy said, they so long far removed from sharecropping. But stoop labor, of understanding, I don't want to do that. I don't have to work in the fields anymore. But don't you understand the heritage of the fields is nothing to be ashamed of. You fed a nation. You powered an economy. When are we going to tell them how wonderful it is to say my ancestors might have been farm laborers or workers or whatever? They fueled an economy and fed a nation through wars and everything else. So, I can get emotional about how we should appreciate what feeding ourselves has done in the overarching aspect of this country.
Yeah, well said. There is certainly needed gratitude for those who keep us all fed today and in the past. You all have both, and I appreciate this, touched on history. Dorothy, you brought it up earlier, just talking about like through choosing what to plant in a school garden or what's served in the school cafeteria, and recognizing the cultures and the histories that we and our families and our communities have, and honoring that as part of foods that we eat. I think it's also important for you all to have both just addressed historical trauma and the role that that plays in being potentially a roadblock to achieving racial justice in school gardens. Yeah, it's something I honestly, I'd been thinking about access to school gardens from the standpoint of land, which, Dorothy, you brought up the fact that give me some concrete and some container bins and there you go. Or thinking about it from access to money. Dorothy, you brought up SNAP benefits a few times, and you may have to correct me on that. For some reason, I thought you could use SNAP dollars to buy seeds. But at the end of the day, like even if you have the space and you have the money, you may have that resistance based on long-time historical traumas based on race and ethnicity. So I think that's a really important thing that both of you have just highlighted. I know we've got some questions from attendees. Before we go to those, I'm curious how you all see the food justice movement intersecting with other justice movements.
Ooh, 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 ooh. Go ahead, Dorothy. Woo. Gosh, that's a deep question, Helen. If we think that food, that being fed well is a civil right and not a privilege, there's an intersection. If you just breathe that being fed well, having access to good food that promotes health and well-being is a civil right and not a privilege. And how we struggle so hard, it reminds me of the struggle back in the 60s, and Dorothy and I grew up in that you talk about food. And I remember, I think I remember, oh God, now I'm really telling my age, John Kennedy, of being down in Mississippi and being down in Appalachia, and how the starting of some of these programs were where people didn't have access to food, didn't have access to food, but knew how to grow the food. And yeah, Helen, you're right. You could buy seeds under the school garden program. But I, as an individual, I don't think I can go to the farmer market and buy a transplant. But trust me, you're right. I bought a lot of seeds through that way. But I think that's the intersection. If we treat having access to good quality food that promotes health and well-being is a civil right, and as they say in Mr. a civil right, what they call it, silver right. I read the story. and not a privilege. You don't get to eat well because you're in a certain economic group. No, no. You should eat well because we're all citizens and we should all have that right. If we're gonna improve our national security, which everybody's always worried about, and the health and well-being of our citizens.
Here, here. And that's exactly why National Farm to School Network has this call to action. It's it's a civil rights issue. It's a basic human rights issue. Dorothy, any thoughts from you on the intersection of food justice and other justice movements?
You know, I think Betty pretty much summed that one. Because I can't think of anything else to add to it, but no, that's about it.
Okay.
Well, it's because Helen too, you keep talking about, what anniversary is this of Farm to School? I've been around you guys now 11, my God, 11 years. I can't believe, Jesus, 11 years. So obviously you're on to something that's important and it has significance and the impact has not diminished. And look how widespread it is. I mean, like I said, I met you guys in 2010, just out of curiosity, what y'all doing down here in Cobo Hall? Let me go down here, see what they're going to do. And what did I stumble upon? Something that every year I was more engaged and I grew more and I began to understand it more. And I did, like I said, I did this equity thing, had me all confused and everything. But then when I saw it, when I hit upon that eating well is a civil right and not a privilege, and the impact it has on our country, our national security, as well as health, and then farm workers and what they've done, and why children should not be ashamed that their forefathers or their current relatives may be working in agriculture because of the impact it's having, and then for children to have more than a consumer relationship with food. Honest to God, we set our kids in front of Sesame U and we let some big marketers determine what their diet's going to be, from the flavor of milk that they drink to a cereal product that looks like a fruit but ain't a fruit. It's more important to their well-being than telling them come outside and grow some hula berries along the walk, or to put them in a container. The greatest thing that's happened to me for being here in Houston is learning how to regrow. I don't know how to grow. I didn't know how to grow here in Texas. When you start talking about, when I found out okra could be grown in place of my flowers because they had a beautiful bloom, and I could serve kids okra, or that peppers, big peppercorns down here, could be grown in my flower garden because they have a beautiful bloom. And then I put in some pollinators with them and watermelon. I'm growing watermelons in my backyard, something I couldn't, big, huge mamas too, that I couldn't do here. And then even out to our farm where we're doing permaculture projects. So we've got a permaculture project going on. The things that Farm to School, I know you don't need this commercial, but I guess my mother always said, you give people their flowers while they live, Helen. So these are your flowers while you're living. So I won't be standing over you saying, Helen. But what this organization has done in terms of promoting food literacy among little children, as we get all the way up to adults and even now into community gardens, to think about what this movement has. And it is a movement, and much as you don't want to think it is, it has been a movement that has legs. It hasn't come and gone. It has legs. And look at Dorothy and I, 11 years and we're still going, we're still going strong. But the impact that you guys have had on having us appreciate the importance of fresh fruits and vegetables and the agricultural education, agricultural literacy of our children. I don't know if that's the question you asked, but I thought it needed to be said. And thank you, Farm to School.
I agree. Just one other little add on to that. As we working with our children, they don't look at farming as being attractive.
Yeah.
When I first started it, and of course, when I walked away from acute healthcare setting into gardening with schools and homes and backyards and all. My son looked at me real weird one morning when I put on a pair of jeans and a flannel shirt, put on my hat, and he says, "So you really did it? You put on a white uniform to put on some overalls. That's not good."
Mm.
He didn't think that it was time for me to transition from acute healthcare setting. And I tell him now, as we've gone through this, I said, "Baby," I say, "your mom is now doing the preventive side of healthcare. We can take our food and use it as our medicine."
That's right.
And by we eating enough local fruits and vegetables, it's going to create a healthier individual. And that's where my goal is to make sure that every backyard or every front yard would have some form of food grown in it in the Delta or even statewide Mississippi. And to be able to do that, our goal is to say farm to school has made a change in the Mississippi Delta. We are now number one in something that's positive, and not saying number one in diabetes and hypertension and heart disease, but we are now number one in transitioning into a healthier lifestyle from our eating. Now that's the overall goal that I see from working with the food system.
And I remember in 2000, and was it right after the farm to school? It was a Healthy and Hunger Free Act. I had the audacity to write an op-ed that Detroit Free Press published about the importance of farm to school, and that it's saying that it's a national defense, it's a proposition for national defense and for healthcare. You want to lower our healthcare costs. You want to talk about having those good, strong people, cannon fodder. Well, that's another political thing. I'll just let that go. But raising kids, it's so immediate to what we do on a daily basis. What is it's almost like you said, I was hungry and you fed me. It's also the other adage about you teach a man to fish and he can eat for a lifetime. All that good old stuff that we used to talk about and be raised around. That now here we are going in, here we are going in 2021, and it hasn't stuck. It hasn't, but we're still out there finding it very necessary to say, finding it important that our kids learn these valuable lessons. I'm telling you, when I can get people in education to say, you know what, I got three schools who have integrated food literacy into their curriculum. And we're going to follow it through three cohorts from K all the way K-12 program about food literacy and redefining what food literacy is about. Yes, about gardening. It's also about cooking. It's about preservation. It's also about different farming techniques to have a permaculture garden. Our 6-acre farm, we're not putting a plow in the ground. We're going to do it all different kind of ways, not even disturbing the soil, but because we've got a real ag educator who wants to try these different kind of ways of growing food. So, yeah, that farm to school, you guys caught on to something good here. That as we go into the next 10 or 20 years or whatever let's make sure it sticks, and let's make sure it has the impact that we intended it to have. And that's so the kids can have a healthier lifestyle, that they can get engaged, not have to look at American dietetic guidelines for information about what good food is, but to know I grow it in the ground, I pick it, I clean it, I eat it raw, I boil it, I dehydrate it, I put it in a tea. Those are not weirdo sort of things. Those are the kind of activities of daily living that your forefathers, many of your forefathers, had to ensure, because they didn't have access to a doctor. The best they have is a midwife or somebody as a herbalist or whatever. Those are kind of things. I don't know if Dorothy had remembering those kind of things, but going out in the garden, they make it a tea to get rid of consumption, to clear up, but kids don't even have those kind of skills anymore. That was our health care.
That was our healthcare. It came straight from the garden or from a tree bark or from the woods.
That was our health care.
Yes.
And y'all, this actually relates to one of the questions that's come from attendees. We do have a few minutes left. And thank you all for those comments. You know, National Farm to School Network has been around, over a decade now, Betty, as you said, since 2007. You and I have known each other since 2010. I do think it's important to acknowledge, since y'all brought up history, the fact that the activities of Farm to School have certainly been around much longer than the organization. You know, growing food as community, and as you all were just saying, like nourishing community with food and food as medicine is, you know, when you look at the work the National Farm to School Network does with Native communities, I mean, you know, honoring land and respecting food and knowing that food is medicine is something that goes back much, much, much longer culturally than the National Farm to School Network. So I think it's important to acknowledge building on that history as we carry forward the work, whether it's in school gardens or in sourcing for school food programs. I also think it's important to say that, you know, Betty, you brought up the fact that there are so many injustices in society. Yes, it's racial and ethnic, but it's also societally, you know, environmentally. The question that we have that's been asked that I want to get to is, from a health perspective, there are so many injustices, but you know, if 2020 and now 2021 is teaching us nothing, it's the fact that those injustices are compounded when you look at it based on skin color, when you look at it based on race and ethnicity, and that's why NFSN is so committed to focusing our work, you know, as we invest in our call to action on race and ethnicity, knowing that skin color does impact everything that we've been talking about. That's a value. And that it's a basic human right to, you know, have access to. So, just wanted to put a pin on the importance of focusing there. So the question that has come in is that around the obesity epidemic, and you all have referenced this. So when it comes to the obesity epidemic, how can we talk to families and kids about eating well and doing so thoughtfully so they still feel confident in their bodies? So ensuring some body positivity when we're addressing the obesity epidemic and talking to families and kids about food.
We have to tell kids all calories aren't good. We don't don't be ashamed of saying that. All calories aren't good, but there are some calories in eating in moderation that are better. And so without being the food police, but a bunch of processed food is not good. So I think that's more important. And I didn't know, Dorothy, your background was in healthcare. I will pass the baton on to you.
One of the things that I would say there is, I always tell people, you are what you eat. And I did a post one day, and one guy came back and he said, a baked potato and a steak is what he was. If I said, if you are what you eat. But I try, when I'm talking to our congregation, I manage to help wellness at our church, along with a couple of other nurses. We try hard not to tell them what they're doing wrong. Mm-hmm. When we do that, we lose them. We listen to what they've had to say, then we'll build our conversation around it. And we use examples that will help them to identify what's not acceptable as a healthy diet. Because children will think anything is healthy. They'll tell you chocolate comes from a plant. You already told them that, and it does. So, and then if you talk to them about eating so much sugary foods, sugar comes from a plant. I've been told these things. So you gotta be able to come around with a way to identify that excessive sugar is not good without just blatantly saying it. And then the children will get that point, and when they do, or even adults, they will repeat back what you said. Well, you were saying that sugar was not ideal. We have to use it this way, or we have to try it that way. That's after we done a lecture on it, and not just telling them not to do it. then and we talk about hidden sugars, and they had no idea what's a hidden sugar or what's in a diet or in what you have consumed was hidden sugar, because they didn't know that. So as we talk to them and identifying them along the way, then when we get them to reflect on what they received from the conversation, then they'll say, well, I learned that eating a lot of starchy foods is just as bad as eating sugar if I'm a diabetic. I didn't have to tell them that, but they figured it out. So now that they know this, they are now ready to make a change. They're not going to eat as much pasta and as much rice and potatoes as they normally been eating. So when we work with them on that, in that line of work, they don't want to know what they're doing wrong. They want to know what they're doing good. They want to know what can they do that's good. And if you get them to ask you questions around their diets, or they can give you an example of what they think is a good diet. And if you ask them, well, what was your dinner like yesterday? What was your meals consist of on yesterday? They'll start telling you. And before they finish, they say, but we shouldn't have had potatoes and macaroni. Now I understand it should have been maybe potatoes and green beans or broccoli or Brussels sprouts. They don't want to tell you that they done had macaroni and cream potatoes and a piece of chicken, because they done heard you talk, and then they say, but we didn't have no vegetables. So they identified it themselves. So that's the way in which we try and work with our children and our adults, or whoever we're talking to about what they're eating and what's good for them.
Thanks, Dorothy. And I do want to acknowledge the time. I know we're going to have folks signing off soon. So I want to just jump in and remind y'all to make sure to like and follow National Farm to School Network on Facebook. Join our e-newsletter to stay up to date on next month's coffee chat. And if you found this conversation valuable, we'd appreciate and welcome support for the work that we do through our national network. And you can see links to information in the chat box. And I think to this question, as we wrap it up, you know, I can only speak to this from the mom perspective on this conversation around body positivity. Just focusing on the fact that it's about balance. Just like when you have a garden or you have a farm, you need to grow a diversity of crops. And, you know, you needed, I talked to my daughter who's scared of bugs now about how you need all different kinds of bugs and insects to make food grow. And so, you know, everything is about balance, a rainbow of colors, if you will, on your plate. And at the same time, like recognizing that, and this is why it's about the system. You know, we talked earlier about the movement and the intersection of food justice with other justice movements. There is intentionality in what is happening in our food system. Our system has been designed to be unhealthy, and particularly to target certain communities, especially based on race and ethnicity. And so I think when you're talking to the individual, encouraging the blame to not be on the person, and to look at the system, and focusing on how the fact that the system is it's just working the way it was designed to be unjust and unhealthy. And that's why we need to work together. You know, the tagline for National Farm to School Network is growing stronger together. You know, Betty, you keep saying thanks to Farm to School, thanks to you, thanks to Dorothy, thanks to everyone here. It's, you know, it takes all of us. It literally, it took a lot of people to design the unjust, unhealthy, racially inequitable food system that we have, and it's going to take all of us to undo that. So just want to thank you all. I know we're over time, but Dorothy, Betty, y'all are, well, you know this, I've said this, y'all are literally heroes of mine. So this was an honor. Thanks to Crystal Oriata, my colleague who planned this but wasn't able to join. I know she'll look forward to watching the recording. Anna, our communications director, thanks for managing technology, and we'll see you next month, if not sooner.
Thank you.